Yeah, this is Union Square.
We're here in New York City on the 25th of April in 2013. I'm very pleased that I got the opportunity to meet you. Could you tell me a little bit about what your background and Peter?
My professional background, I started out as an artist. I studied painting in New York at the School of Visual Arts. I worked as a photographer on and off for a lot of years. I worked also in theater management, off-Broadway repertory theater. A huge amount of my life is in the arts. But a little more than 35 years ago, I became very interested in the subject of the UFO phenomena and its implications. And I kept doing what I was doing as far as my creative career went, but I became obsessed with this subject. And after about a dozen years of writing articles, starting to speak at conferences and things, the opportunity to co-write a book on a very important case came along, and I took that opportunity. I really did not know what I was getting myself into. But when we finally finished the book and it came out, it put that case on the map, as we say, and gave me a higher visibility in the work. And I've continued to do investigative writing around UFOs ever since, and develop my own papers. And now I'm working also with quite a lot of people helping to organize different UFO conferences and events around the country. That is basically the main things that I'm involved in doing right now.
And Ryan, how did you get into the field?
I got involved in the field at a young age, probably 12 or 13 years old.
Okay.
I never had that quintessential sighting that many researchers or UFO enthusiasts have had. I tripped into the library and I took out a book by Stanton Friedman, Crash at Corona, about the Roswell case. It fascinated me. It terrified me that these craft were not only being seen by people, but that they were crashing on our planet, and no one was doing anything about it. And I had nowhere to turn. I had no one to talk to it about. And it terrified me. I wanted to learn more, so I took out book after book after book, and that's where my interest in the phenomenon started, was definitely through literature. And it sort of laid on the shelf for a while. I got involved with sports and whatnot as a elementary school student, and it wasn't until years later when I entered college that I was reinvigorated into the UFO phenomenon. I started writing for a few magazines on the topic, and a lot of my interest stemmed from there, and that's when I ultimately met Peter.
Okay, and what is your work now? What's your occupation?
I am a professional playwright here in the city.
Yeah.
I work odd jobs now and again, but my main focus is in the world of theater. I write plays. I do some freelance writing for different UFO magazines, and
I think we should get into that, talk about that a little bit later.
Of course.
Because I have a feeling that this is related to the UFO subject.
Very much so, yes.
There is a specific case that I would like to talk about, and that's the case, Peter, that you have been interested in for many years now, which is called the Rendlesham Forest Incident, Bentwaters, in 1980. Could you tell us the main thing? What is the chronology of this case?
The Rendlesham Forest UFO Incident, sometimes known as the Bentwaters UFO Incident, is certainly Great Britain's best known and best documented UFO event. Sometimes it is referred to as Britain's Roswell, but only because it is as famous there as Roswell is in America and many other parts of the world. The specifics of the cases are not comparable. In the best compressed way, the events that compromise the Rendlesham Forest Incident is a series of separate events over 3 consecutive nights in 1980, right between Christmas and New Year's. And they varied quite dramatically. In fact, one of the things that made the case so interesting to me is there is some of everything that forms the basis of all the specialty areas of research that together we would call ufology, in terms of eyewitnesses, of physical evidences, of civilian witnesses, military witnesses, physiological changes to organic material, a history of paranormal, anomalous UFO-related activity in this area, Suffolk, East Anglia, which is a part of England about 70 miles or so northeast of London. The fact also that there are other events that predate this in the same area, a military paper trail, cover up some very dark doings with military or civilian intelligence, abduction. Anyway, on the first night of the 3 nights, several things happened. One was that 2 law enforcement Air Force police saw a light go down in the Rendlesham Forest.
Which is just right outside the base.
Yeah, the RAF Bentwaters and RAF Woodbridge, they were called sister bases. They were NATO bases. Bentwaters leased to the Americans since World War II, Woodbridge RAF. And they were only 5 or 6 miles apart, but the Rendlesham Forest was their setting. This is not an ancient, historic, medieval King Arthur or Sir Lancelot kind of forest. Is 100 years or more old. It was a forest planted to have a timber crop to harvest trees from. Anyway, this light that went down in the woods did not indicate that it was a crashed conventional aircraft. There was no explosion, there was no ground concussion, there was no fire, but this comes at a very sensitive and very pregnant moment in the Cold War. The Russians were very, very concerned about the pro-democracy movement coming in Poland, led by Lech Walesa, who at the time was an unknown electrician. And so you in Denmark, we in America, we did not know that there were more than 100,000 Soviet troops on their border with Poland. And they were very close to war. Like they would have done, if things kept going, they would have done what they did in Hungary in 1956 and rolled in and flattened that revolution.
So that was the context.
This was the end of December 1980, yes. So there was high tension to start with. Machines of undetermined origin were observed as lights under intelligent control moving above the forest around the twin base complex. They were observed from the weapons storage area from an 80-foot tower. They were picked up on radar as well as visual.
And this is the first night.
First night, that's right.
Yeah.
And the 2 law enforcement police who finally made their way to the area where the light went down encountered a truly anomalous machine of advanced configuration. It is described usually as equal triangular shape tapering upwards with the appearance of black glass, very shiny and dark, with raised or lowered but definitely feelable, call them what you will, symbols, hieroglyphics. They weren't numbers or letters as we understand them, but one of the men started to copy them out in his book. Touched the thing, felt a slight charge, touched it again.
But now you're talking about the second night as well, right?
Well, now I'm talking about the second night when other machines were seen moving over the area, some of them in a very organized pattern. Beams of light were observed being shot into the weapons storage area, also first night. And when I say weapons storage area, I mean conventional nasty weapons and nuclear weapons at a time when America was not supposed to have this kind of nuclear ordnance in England. In other words, we in America were breaking our treaty with England, having this ordnance there. We now know, or I now know, as well as I can know, without absolute physical confirmation, that somehow, as documented repeatedly in Robert Hastings' important book UFOs and Nukes about the military and UFOs, that somehow these beams of light, which were visible, the reason they were visible at night, because you think about it, like a laser or a flashlight, you see the spot over there, but you don't see the line going over there. In this case, December 1980, very temperate winter, there was so much moisture in the air that these beams of light being shot down caught on everyone, so you could see it like a line drawn to the ground. And somehow these beams penetrated these hardened bunkers and shut down, or in Charles Halt, at the time the deputy base commander, lieutenant colonel, when he told my co-author and I and another researcher about this, his wonderfully unforgettable phrase was that these beams of light adversely affected the ordnance. This is brilliantly documented in Robert Salas's important book, Bob being a former Air Force nuclear specialist who was involved in a very famous case of nuclear shutdown in America in the Midwest in '67, I think, where he was the man standing at the console, seeing those lights blink out as people above him on the ground were seeing the UFOs in the area. Anyway,
so this ties into a history of nuclear weapons and UFO sightings.
That's correct.
And this is not the only. This is not the only case.
No, it's amazing how many well corroborated cases there actually are, Frederik. And also, second, third night, locations in and around the forest were found, and in some cases documented, by having plaster casts made of the impressions in the soil, and documenting the fact that these things, when they came down, there was nothing like ethereal about them. They broke through forest cover, they tore branches, they ripped off leaves. Also, in the places where they made contact with a tree or soil, there was an elevated background count of beta and gamma radiation, which is in trace everywhere in the world. It won't hurt us, but even that it was 10 times more in those little areas, it is not harmful to humans, but it is absolutely documented. We have Colonel Halt finally going out with a contingent of men, and they encounter a machine that comes right over them, shines a beam right down to their feet. Colonel Halt is recording this, and you can hear the tension in the men's voices. Also, in this time frame, the most controversial aspect of this happens to my co-author, who is a law enforcement. He is a security cop. The original cops are law enforcement. The difference between a police officer you'd see in New York in a blue uniform and a paramilitary law enforcement person with an automatic weapon or something. Anyway, he and other men are brought out to an area where they do logging of the forest, and they are broken into 3-man groups and told to head out that way and investigate a disturbance. Ultimately, they end up in a farmer's field where there is a glowing ground fog, self-contained. There's no ambient light, there's no moon. This is a big oval shape on the ground, like a giant long aspirin, and it is glowing, and the men are ordered to surround it. They stand their ground as they watch a small red light slowly come in over the field, which holds their attention, and then it comes right over the area that they are, where this ground fog is, and then with no noise explodes. with such brightness that for a few seconds you are temporarily blind. As their eyes readjust to the light, then they see that there is now a fully articulated machine, much larger than the one on the first night, standing right there. Ultimately, there is an appearance of beings, for lack of a more descriptive term. Now, even 33 years after this event, people who were involved in different parts of it, scholars, researchers, other military personnel, are still not only arguing with each other, but they are attacking each other. This is very unusual. Many of the witnesses, the eyewitnesses, we all acknowledge that they were put through certain things by military or military intelligence to either confuse their thinking, upset their thinking, frighten them into not talking about it. And so there are real memories, there are implanted memories. And the only other thing I'll say is, in one case, two of the witnesses are accusing another witness that the memories that he thinks are the most real, they are implanted. But none of us can know what happened to other people. When the argument is made, how come other people have not come forward from that third night to support your story? The fact is, I know one who did, but he does not want to be made public. Any of these men, they have seen for more than 30 years the way my co-author has been treated, attacked. If 1, 2, 3, or 5 more come forward, and I did not used to feel like this, I wanted them all to come forward because it was good for the truth. But at this point in my life, I am more circumspect. You are here for a while and then you're gone. Enjoy your life as much as you can. If you want to be a hero, know what you're getting into. And what I postulate is that the reason more of these men have not come forward is they're not stupid. They don't need this. They're family people. They have their jobs and positions and things. And for anybody that says, well, it never happened, the physical evidence drawn from that very spot in that field, nowhere else in the field, is the most incredible physical evidence we have to back up any part of the Rendlesham Forest incident. Remarkable. Also, my co-author Larry Warren's eyes, his retinas were burned. We have this in his Air Force military documentation. He didn't have burned retinas when he went into the Air Force the year before. That is the simplest compression of the case, but it is many interlocking events, many distinct personalities, and I think it is a terribly important UFO incident.
It is a very, very complex case, because you're talking about the Larry Warren and other experiences, and you're also talking about this last night where many people are surrounding an object, and this part of the story is not very often out there, because this is a case that has been talked about a lot about in documentaries, and this last part they're talking about is not very often in these documentaries, and it just shows that it is a very complex case, and what my viewpoint is that I'm not a researcher, I'm not a ufologist, but I think there is enough, you could say, testimony to come to the conclusion that something was definitely happening at these twin NATO bases during this time. What it exactly was, I'm not sure what it was, but what's your feeling?
I think several things happened. First, I think there was a genuine incursion of high technology from some place else.
Yeah.
Another dimension, another universe, I don't know. But in this case, there also may have been overlaying on it a psychological operation, a prepared template, plan, series of procedures to put into effect if something like this happened in a military context, so that while it was happening, they were already playing with the minds of some of the primarily young men who were involved. Also, and I speak freely here, and I will say this, anything that I ever say in an interview like this, anyone in the world is welcome to subject to voice stress analysis. This is technology that now, it used to be only major law enforcement had it. Now you can get a program for your computer and learn how to use it. It is as good as, the person using it. But I don't lie. I make mistakes, but that's a very different thing, and I correct my mistakes when I make it. So what I'm saying here is, again, for anyone who would say, yes, something amazing happened. Yes, I agree with Peter. There was a psychological operation. Yes, these men were played with in their minds. Some of their memories are sorted out. But that third night event, that no one else will come forward and stand right next to Larry and say, yes, this happened to me too. Even though I am here to tell you, well, I know of two other guys. I've had a long talk with one of them. Anyway, the physical evidence from this very spot, and only this spot, where when we walked out into that field for the first time, 8 years and 2 months after this had happened to Larry, he had never been back there. His arm shot out. He pointed out in the field. This is all being recorded while it's happening. He said it sat right there. And then we are quiet for some seconds, and he says, but of course that's a coincidence, that area looks different than the rest of the field. And my first thought, training myself as I have, was not, oh my God, a trace case where something has happened to the soil. My first thought was, you're right, that's a coincidence. It's a plowed farmer's field. It could be a play of light. Maybe it was hit by lightning. Maybe they dumped fertilizer there and didn't grade it out. Ultimately, though, took many samples, came back sometime after that, took 15 or 20 pounds of dirt. It was all analyzed, and the things that we learned about that one little spot convinced me, not only beyond any reasonable doubt, that something happened to Larry was very real, and it didn't happen over here, it happened here, where he reflexively pointed when we first got there. Seed germination tests. Control samples, perfect. Affected sample, takes longer to grow, only mutant strains of the rice, the barley, the rye, the grain that was there. The next is that the affected soil had lost its ability to retain moisture to the degree that the control samples did. It took much longer to make it into mud. You didn't just mix it up with water, it floated to the top, it sank to the bottom. There are little bits of particles, like as big as a piece of sand, in that soil that are metallic. In the control samples, just what it should be. In the affected sample, more than 4 times the amount. And our laboratory technician, who I still stay in touch with, and he is a real person, he can testify to all this. I said, how could that happen? He said, something that sat there exerted such a powerful electromagnetic effect. He said, think about this. It's not like the soil is stamped down, but it's still kind of packed. You're something as big as a piece of sand, and something is so powerful, it's pulling you into this area. Lastly, this is an area that is maybe 5 or 6 miles from the sea, so you should find some sand in it. And they found in the control samples the right amounts. There was no sand in the affected area. It had melted. It was silica. It was a form of glass. Now, people can lie, they can be brainwashed. Psychological operations can convince people that things happen that didn't happen. But a psychological operation, or somebody who is pathological or mentally ill, still does not melt sand. They do not exert electromagnetic effects. They do not change soil so it only produces mutant plants, etc. So I rest that part of my case.
Ryan, you are also very interested in this case. What is your connection with this case? I understand that you're working with it in some way.
Yes. I like I had mentioned earlier, I am a professional playwright, and in doing so, I had contacted Peter a few years ago about writing an article about the Rendlesham case. I was familiar with the other witnesses and whatnot, but it was Peter and Larry's story that drew me in. it was their book, Left at East Gate, that first got me interested in the case and ultimately drove me to become obsessed with the case. Not only for the sheer amount of people involved, but the physical evidence, as Peter mentioned. These are things that you cannot deny. Like Peter mentioned, there may have been psych ops going on. There may have been something of extraterrestrial origin, but the fact of the matter is there is physical evidence for this case, which puts it apart from so many other cases. And that's what drew me into the case, was the amount of people involved, the testimony of the witnesses, and like Peter said, these men were young. They were 18, 19 years old. Of course they're going to do what they're told when they are told not to talk about this, or that what they saw was not what they saw. It fascinated me that Larry had the courage to come forward with what he did. But yeah, I think I related to it because of that sense of wanting to work for your own government and having your own government not lie to you, but almost in a way threaten you. You're there to do a job, and they're basically throwing it back in your face. So there's a sense of that rebellion that drew me into the case, for sure.
But what are you trying to do? Well, what are you? I understand you're writing something about this.
Yes, I'm currently working on a theatrical version of the Rendlesham case. In relation to the third night of events concerning Larry Warren. Like Peter mentioned, there's much controversy with the third night of events, and there are a lot of things that happened on the third night that others have corroborated. They may not be at a point in their lives where they want to come forward with that, but I trust in Peter that these people are telling the truth and back Larry. And that is the story that I'm trying to tell with a stage version of the Rendlesham events on the third night.
Have you talked to other people in your environment or your colleagues, so to speak, about this project?
I have.
What is their reaction?
It varies immensely. There are those who shrug it off and run for the hills. They as soon as the UFO topic comes up, there's that ridicule factor that many UFO researchers experience. But I would actually beg to differ that the amount of people I've told about the Rendlesham case, their ears immediately perk, and instead of running away from that, they want to know more. It's the UFO topic itself is not only fascinating, it ultimately tells us much about ourselves and where we are as a society technologically, and where we're heading and what's possible. If these are beings from other worlds, it makes us question where we are in our own timeline here on Earth and what we can aspire to. And I think a lot of that relates to the Rendlesham case. I really do. These men were seeing things that these were trained men. They knew what they were looking at the sky. That was their job, to differentiate between different aircraft. And the fact that things were landing and they could not identify these things says something. It really does. And I would say that is primarily what I'm trying to tell, is these young men who signed up to protect their nation, and another nation as well. And ultimately, they were treated horribly, absolutely horribly, by their own government.
Let me just play devil's advocate for a moment with both of you. There are some that say, one story is that it was a lighthouse on Orford Ness, or whatever it was called. That's one thing. And other people would say that some other people were playing a prank in the forest. What do you have to say? What can you say to this? Any of you, or can you?
Well, I studied all of these theories again, our book took 9 years to write and research, which sometime was the curse. Other times it was a gift because we had plenty of time to go back, reevaluate, re-examine. It is an insult. It would be funny if it was not so insulting to suggest that these highly trained military specialists who carried around automatic weapons that could kill you, who worked in very close proximity to nuclear ordnance that could kill many people, who, in the case of Larry, he had two specialties that he graduated his basic training with and then had specialty training. One was anti-terrorism work relative to England. Of course, at the time it was the IRA, and that did not come up as, in his specific responsibilities, but also working around nuclear ordnance. So the late Philip Klass, the most famous American debunker, he even suggested that these men had been smoking reefers and that they were high that night. That is not only insulting, you could go to military prison for this. There's a process before these men went on guard called guard mount, where you are reviewed, and let's say you had a cold or weren't feeling well, and you took a little cold pill that morning. You would not be allowed to serve on guard duty that night. If you had a few sips of beer at lunch, you are off until the next shift. This was very serious. The idea that it was a prank is even more insulting. And I have been out in that field and in that area at night, because I've returned to England more than 20 times. I'd have to count up my passport stamps, but at least 20 times I've gone back there and to that area in Suffolk, and I have been out in that field at night in the winter, in the summer, in the fall, in the spring, and there is a time, in fact, when this happened, December. You're dealing with a lot of evergreen trees, but the other trees, the leaves are down, and at just the right angle, you can see the light of the Orford Ness Lighthouse. I forget, maybe 10 miles away in the distance through the trees. It's slowly turning like this. So at certain intervals, you get a flash of light and then it disappears. But to confuse the flashing light of a lighthouse that is 10 miles away, especially for men, many of whom had seen the lighthouse, knew the area, with a landed machine of undetermined origin on the ground, or lights being shot down from illuminated objects above, or impressions in the soil that are radioactive, to suggest that that is somehow an explanation is also insulting. And if you go down every one of these skeptically inspired explanations, none of them support the thesis or any of the accounts. And that goes up to the officer corps as well as enlisted men. So
what it basically comes down to is the witness testimony, and of course some of the physical evidence.
Yes, witness testimony and physical evidence. In this case, though, there is also what we would call anecdotal evidence that is very strong. This happened in December 1980. In 1956, there is a very well documented incident that occurred at a base not far from there. Lincoln Heath was involved, and there were other bases as well. This is 1956 now, where a series of objects were clocked at going about 12,000 miles an hour over the area. Ones that were visible to the naked eye were observed from the ground by military personnel. They were observed by pilots in the air. They were picked up as hard radar returns. And that area has a very colorful history of not just UFO sightings, but other kinds of paranormal activity as well.
Another high-ranking officer who was not directly involved in this case was Lord Hill Norton.
Yes.
Can you talk to...
Oh, I can.
Yeah.
Lord Hill Norton, who passed away probably 8 or 9 years ago at 92, was a cantankerous, fill in the word, character that most of us only have a sense of from old English movies. He was a career military man who was Admiral of the Fleet, meaning he was the highest ranking naval officer. He then went on to become chief of the Ministry of Defense, the equivalent of a Colin Powell or another American Secretary of Defense. When he left defense, as the highest ranking uniformed military man in the United Kingdom, he then became a member of Parliament in the House of Lords. And toward the end of the time that Larry and I were working on our book, Timothy Good, the great British UFO writer, one of my favorite people in the field.
Who's actually visiting Copenhagen in June.
Will you send him my affectionate best wishes? He is the man. Tim is another person who was so kind and encouraging to me when my name was not very well known. And he was so impressed with the work that Larry and I had done that he set up an interview for us with Hill Norton. It was like anybody in ufology that wanted to get to Hill Norton. He thought we were all crazy except Tim, who we respected. If Tim said you were okay, he would speak to you. And I remember, I will never forget, a call that I had with him where I was quite nervous, Larry less nervous, but he was a total character who, when he learned of the nuclear treaty violation, he went ballistic himself. He was furious. And the idea that this was a nuclear base, and seizing on some of the nonsense that people like Philip Klass had said, that either the men involved were high or, not in their right mind, which in itself, and he is a very dry character, in itself a problem for trained personnel working around nuclear ordnance, or that the reports of these highly trained observers of what they saw is what they saw. Wonderful line about if a UFO made its way up the steps of the Ministry of Defense, the people at the door would not recognize it. But he became the greatest irritant in the side of Her Majesty's government, the highest ranking former, serving military leader, to keep bringing this subject up right until he died. I have tremendous admiration for Hill Norton. I have a letter that he sent to our publisher relative to taking our work very seriously. And he was a character. He was a hero, and he was a character.
I'm jumping a little bit here. Were there any civilian sightings?
Oh, many, because remember, this is...
Maybe Ryan, do you remember
my knowledge on that is slight, Frederik, but I do know that civilian witnesses were involved in Rendlesham. Specific names are escaping me, but I'm sure Peter can elaborate on that. But yes, there were civilians who witnessed the same things that these officers did as well. Yeah.
To a degree, you're dealing with small farms and little communities, charming villages in and around the forest area, in and around the Twin Base complex. So they saw parts of events over these 3 nights. I have good friends who still remember the night that the convoy that Larry was on, that left base, that passed through their little village called Ike at, sometime after midnight, that it woke them up because they had moved into the area. It was a line of military convoys going right by their house, and it never happened before, and it never happened after. But yes, there were many civilians as well as military personnel who were involved as witnesses to one degree or another over those nights.
And what did they see?
Bits and pieces of what they saw the lights in the night sky. One of the most amazing accounts, and I actually got 2 that were very similar. The second one was told to me firsthand, the first one secondhand. It was a gentleman that I met in 2005 who had returned to Suffolk to see Christmas in with his family, but he had lived there at the time of the events. He was 20 odd years old, and he was coming home from work that night, driving through the forest in a car that was being held together by string and chewing gum and tape, as some cars are. And he said the radio was starting to get staticky. And this is something that we've seen, it's a common thing, but when it's combined with it. And how did we deal with that in the old pre-digital days? You start to bang on your radio, on your dashboard, and if you're lucky, something pops into place. But it was not, and then the wheel was getting sluggish of the car. It was a manual drive, not a power, steering wheel. And he said he saw what could only be a car coming up behind him on the forest road. And the closer the car got, the more strong the static got, just... And it's just like out of a moment in Close Encounters. As that car came up behind him, it came up over him. And it was about the size of a car, and then it came down in front of his car and continued down the road like 10 feet off the ground and went out of sight. And when he described this to me, he said, at that point, my car has stopped. The electrics have gone out. I've coasted to the side of the road. It's now gone, and I realize I'm holding the steering wheel so tight, I can't take my fingers off it. I'm hyperventilating. I make myself calm down. I turn the key. The ignition starts. I go home. I told my father. It was Christmas Eve or Christmas night or the day after Christmas. I never told anyone else until right now. And you are free to tell this story, but you don't know my last name or anything else, so that happened to me. That is a pretty dramatic example, but other people saw different parts of these events depending on where their home was and the angle of what they could see in the sky from where they were.
What do you guys think actually happened that night? Was it extraterrestrials or something else? What is your gut feeling?
Not having done the hard research that Peter has done, I'm more of a armchair researcher in that sense, having studied his work and many of the other witnesses' testimony. I do believe it was a mix of both military and, dare I say, something of another world. I do believe that these men were, like Peter said, meddled with in a way. I believe something beyond our control happened over those 3 nights, and the response to it was both predetermined and not predetermined. I think the higher-ups on the base, having to do with the U.S. Air Force, were handling the situation as best they could. I don't believe they had full knowledge of what was happening, but I think they did see it as an opportunity as to how do these men react to a situation of this magnitude. Having something that they know nothing about infringe on their territory. I mean, you have the other whole debate that the British government wanted nothing to do with this. These were NATO-owned bases, primarily housing U.S. military officers. Britain would gladly hand this over to the U.S. to deal with. So you have that whole aspect, too, of the tension between these two nations and this profound thing happening at the time during Cold War tensions. So I am a firm believer that there were both psychological operations happening within the military, and I am a firm believer that we did not have control over the situation.
What is your feeling? What is your conclusion about this case, Peter?
Well, I did do the hard work. I did do the research. I should be considered an authority on this and very knowledgeable. What do I know happened for sure there and what caused it? I don't know. Just because you spend years studying something doesn't mean you find the definitive answer. However, I am convinced that whatever was the cause of or the intelligence behind these incursions, these landings, the interactive events on the first night, the third night, the physiological changes to materials, was in fact other intelligences from parts unknown, indicative of those that come and go from our Earth with impunity, probably since time immemorial. Are they from another planet, another galaxy, another universe, another solar system, another dimension? I am absolutely sure that I don't know. The irony here is that the most conservative hypothesis, if you accept that something truly anomalous is happening here, is the extraterrestrial one. And I'm perfectly comfortable if somehow, someday, that is what we come to know. I think also that this incursion coincided with the military or military intelligence putting a plan into effect to diffuse, upfuse, confuse people's perception of the event with the calculated idea that if you can frighten some of the individuals who saw it, silence other individuals who saw it, confuse other ones, or ideally do the same to everybody that thinks they had an idea of what happened, by chemical or hypnotic or other mind-affecting ways. And there is no question.
Well, that can be done. We know that this can be done.
We've been doing it for many decades, even longer, going back in time with potions and the like. There is no question in the minds of skeptical inquirers, true believers, people who have investigated this case with a very scientific, military eye, pragmatic investigation of physical materials, the conflicting accounts of individuals, even those who were in the same place at the same time and have different memories, like two people who witnessed an automobile accident. You know. My alternative thought on what may cause this is a wild guess, and so far out and so unlikely that you can just dismiss it right now, except that it is more likely than time travelers from our future actually coming to do this. And what it is that the military had a very sophisticated plan sitting, waiting to be deployed in the event of a multiple UFO incident involving credible military personnel, especially in a highly charged political moment, especially involving nuclear weaponry. And they tried it out there. And what it was doing some mind altering with some of the men involved. In some cases, making one guy feel this, another guy feel that, and mixing their real memories with manufactured memories.
Do you think we'll ever know the truth about this case?
Not completely, no. It's the nature of the beast. Let's say in an ideal world, a dozen major credible witnesses come forward who have simply never said anything yet over the next 12 years, each one adding details to the account or supporting Peniston, Burroughs, Warren, Hall, Bustinza, any of the names that we know attached to the reality of this case. But will that really happen? Even if they did, will they be attacked one after the other as just opportunists who now want a piece of the action, or they want to be on TV, or they want to write a book? If Her Majesty's government had not closed down its UFO declassification project at a certain point cold, even though they did wonderful work and more than 10,000 separate documents on the subject, I would call most of them mid or low level. A lot of interesting smoke, but no smoking gun, as we say here. Even then, there will be those people who will not be interested in reading them. Other people who, I'm not going to go to a Ministry of Defense website just to read some ancient document about some captain who thought that the thing he saw might be non-standard or whatever. If you don't want to know something, we are remarkably resistant creatures. And for me, I am as fascinated with the human being's ability to deny what is happening or may be happening as the things that are happening themselves. We can find rationales. We can talk ourselves out of things. We can be informed by a religious fear or a secular belief that makes us not process honestly in the same way we would do something more conventional but totally outside of our normal experience. And all of these things have to be kept in mind as you go through and try to educate yourself. If you were to say to me, if somebody wanted to know more about the Rendlesham case, what should they read? What should they look at? My first reaction would not be buy Larry's in my book. It would be, there is quite a list of scholarly articles, pop culture articles, newspaper articles. You can find a lot of them in Left at Eastgate. The first book written on it was published by 3 British women in 1984. And although it got things wrong, who doesn't, especially in a situation like this? There are ever so many lectures from conferences online. But educate yourself. Read Georgina's book, read our book, read Jim and John's book when it comes out. Read the articles that you can. Find the conference videos. Get as much information as you can on the subject, and then just use your common sense. You are the judge, you are the jury. It's one of the reasons I was so pleased when you asked me to participate with Ryan here in doing these interviews for Exopolitics Denmark, because I like your philosophy of how you approach the subject. For me, if I am going to investigate a new case, and when I say investigate, I mean commit myself to a huge book, or to write a paper on it, or investigate in the sense of sit down with somebody for 10 minutes at a conference who wants to share something with you that happened to them or that they saw. I will use my common sense, my good human knowledge, understand my own limitations or fears or concerns or beliefs, and be as open to the information as I can, and then come to my best informed decision.
The topic of disclosure. What is your take on that, Ryan? Do you think it's ever going to happen? Is there something to disclose?
Yes, there is definitely something to disclose. I often, when I've been asked this question, I do like to refer to the investigator Nick Pope, who says that there's a delineation between a small d and a capital D when dealing with disclosure. There's this sense of partial disclosure that we are being formally set up for something. Whether it be through movies or television or through political figures, I do believe there is a disclosure that is imminent. There has to be at some point, whether it be from our own governments or from whatever it is that ultimately is to be disclosed. I don't believe it will come from the U.S. government. I am a firm believer in that. There's over 50 years of denial that they would have to answer to in relation to that. I think it will take a large event and whatever it may be that is out there in the universe visiting us to make themselves known. I think it is going to come when they are ready. And then there will be a lot of questions remaining. When disclosure happens, I don't believe that will be the end of it. There's going to be so many aspects to that, whether it be religiously, politically, socially, economically. It's going to ultimately change everything we once believed in and where we as the human race are heading.
Where do you see Hollywood's role in this disclosure process?
Slow and very demeaning in a way. You see Hollywood dealing with the topic of aliens is malevolent and constantly invading the earth and taking our resources, and it's something to fear. I don't believe that whatever it is that is out there is something to be feared. I think that's one of the big problems with the UFO topic is so many people believe that whatever intelligence is out there is coming here to wipe us out and take over our planet. This is something that Hollywood tends to feed on constantly because they know that it will get them viewers.
There was another movie, it was not exactly a Hollywood movie, called District 9 that had
Yes.
a different angle on that.
I'm a big fan of that movie, actually. Have you seen that, Peter?
Oh,
Yes.
Very clever.
I think it was a very interesting take, relating it to problems we have here on Earth with our own immigration problems. It's taking one culture and pushing them off into a corner and thinking of them less than us, less intelligent, less informed, less culturally evolved. And I think it was interesting that this is what we did to these other intelligences. Is they came to our planet, we imprisoned them, and all they want is to go home. And it says a lot of the human condition, I think, and where we were as a political structure at that time when the movie came out. It just so happened to be an E.T. backdrop that they used. So I think that movie sort of stands on its own in relation to Hollywood dealing with E.T.s. There have been other movies, for sure. I think Close Encounters is a great example that took the topic seriously, not only having people like J. Allen Hynek involved with the movie, but taking it to that level of a civilization coming down, and the government dealing with it in a way that they see fit. I'm interested to hear your take on that, Peter, where Hollywood stands with all this, and if they have some sort of connection with the American government or other governments throughout the world in relation to that.
Well, first I should say a word about disclosure, because there is the act, by the dictionary definition of revealing something that is unknown. And now, of course, we associate this word with a growing political movement of people who want this information disclosed. Well, as far as I'm concerned, everybody in the movement, they're absolutely crazy people, but in Denmark, the worst. It's absolutely out of their mind. Now, you can use that to destroy my career or to show that I have a sense of humor. The movement of disclosure for me is one of the most interesting things to ever come out of UFO studies. It is relatively new in the last decade. It did not happen before that. There were certain people in different national communities, sometimes naive, sometimes just informed by a spirit of wanting to be positive forces in the universe, who only and always saw the others, these visitors, as good. I, at this point, have come to feel that there are different kinds of other intelligences. We may, in fact, be dealing with all kinds of races, for lack of a more descriptive term, beings or energy forms that are here for any number of reasons, whose relationship with humanity, in some cases, may be abiding and very interconnected, that they have been coming here for thousands of years and occasionally doing something that so impacts humans' perception of life on Earth that it comes back. There may be parts, I'm sure there are, parts of the stories, the legends, the lore, the absolute real information that religions are built on, that could be, some part of it could be a misinterpretation of a genuine anomalous event happening. In the Bible, in the Old Testament, Ezekiel is an interesting example of a wheel within a wheel coming out of the sky and a angel coming out of it. Maybe it's just a myth or a fairy tale. Maybe it was a true religious apparition, or maybe it was a being from parts unknown in an advanced machine confronting a human being, knowing that this would become part of the oral tradition of his society. And communicating values through it. But as far as disclosure goes, it is a wonderfully independent movement. It manifests itself differently, not just in different countries, but in different parts of the same country sometimes. It is a bunch of activists and idealists coming together, wanting to affect their government's stance on either UFO secrecy or excessive UFO secrecy, and in the process to educate their fellow citizens that this general subject of UFOs, unidentified flying objects, and their implications are not a joke and something we all need to take seriously and know more about. I'm reminded of a wonderful thing that a well-known colleague of ours said, Stanton Friedman. And I may be off a little on the quote, but essentially it is, the question is not, are all UFOs machines of advanced technology, mysterious origin that come and go from the earth with impunity? The question is, has one ever been? Even those of us who take the subject seriously, who know that there is a reality to it, not because we've become believers, but like an attorney working as a district attorney who keeps seeing evidence of criminals who steal things. You don't have to have an epiphany to know that this is really happening. You're seeing all kinds of evidence in front of you. Many people who perceive UFO studies from the outside think, what do these people have? They tell each other stories. Some weak-minded person sees a light in the night sky. They don't know a plane, from a helicopter, from a comet. And there's all this mythology, and there's, some people lie, some people want to feel special, some people are mentally ill. It's not a science, it's not a reality. Of course, there is hard evidence, the same kinds of evidence that you could bring into a trial in a court of law in any country in the world that would prove somebody guilty of a felony or a murder or something. But the ridicule that has been so pounded into the heads of most of our friends, of our parents, of our grandparents about this phenomena still has a hold on culture, Western world especially. And we, with even an interview like this, maybe we can change a few minds. Somebody sits down, they watch Ryan and I, they start to watch other things that Disclosure Denmark has available to watch, and they began to see this is not a joke. They begin to educate themselves. But this is mathematical progression, changing people 1, 2, 7 at a time. If you have a bunch of people together on a camping trip and they look up and they see a true phenomena, maybe they all change at once. But it's not like we have been given an event where a mass following of people in different countries would come together and be out in the streets holding signs because they now know it's real. How disclosure will come is something that people in our field love to argue about and discuss. I feel that the United States of America, which has been instrumental in creating a climate of secrecy from the get-go, which has in great part been picked up by other world governments to varying degrees, that they are almost incapable. And I mean that if the United States of America was a person, it would have a certain neuroses, a certain social problem in communication, because it has lied so long.
Now it's impossible to...
Yeah.
It's like the teenager that's lied so much.
Think about that little piece of sand in the middle of a beautiful pearl. The pearl keeps layering the secretions because that little piece of sand is irritating. And so you end up with a lie that is bigger and more elegant and certainly more lustrous to look at, but at the center of it is the original lie. I agree with my friend and colleague Rich Dolan in a philosophical way that the United States of America will never willingly do what Great Britain has done, do what France did, do what Denmark has done to a degree, do what so many countries have done, South American countries, European countries. They have declassified some of their UFO information and made it publicly available. We seem pathologically incapable of it. Maybe because part of what we are hiding is not scary secrets about them, but in 65, 64 years or whatever it's been, we have learned so bloody little about them and still don't have a way to affect them the way they affect us.
But what really I'm focused on is not really so much the secrecy, because you could say it's just a silence, and you could say maybe there were some lies in the beginning, like in the 40s and the 50s, especially when we're talking about the United States, but now it's just silence. You can hear a pin drop.
Bad habits stay.
So, and what is there actually to disclose? I mean, government and state is a very, very complex thing, and who knows what? I mean,
it goes beyond that, and I think, again, our friend Richard Dolan is really a pioneer in articulating some of these thoughts, especially, well, not especially, but here in America over the last 15, 20 years, to a degree that I think we here are only beginning to be aware of. The power in our government, which is so troubled right now. Money runs everything, as it does in many things in the world. This is not the way it should be in a democracy, but I am an idealist as well as a realist. The fact is that there are companies, corporations, who have net earnings that are bigger than the national budgets of certain third world countries. Not a problem. The power that they bring and their insanely, almost insidiously close relationship now with the power brokers in the military-industrial complex. Right now, I'm convinced, for example, that for the last 20 years or so, a percentage, and I couldn't give you a number if my life depended on it, a percentage of what has passed for UFO sightings around the world. Yes, these are advanced. They work in ways, they are able to move through space in ways that our conventional thinking has a problem with, but they are ours. They are highly classified. When the first drone photographs started to appear, often in a small UFO journal or a counterculture journal or, a conspiracy publication, people in some cases thought they were an extension of truly anomalous, unknown, otherworldly UFOs because we had never seen anything like them. And then we began to learn that we're making these things. Also, for a fertile imagination. And this is true, and we should all be good skeptics. Skeptic is not a dirty word. It simply means to approach every aspect of this work with a critical mindset, open-minded, but no agenda. You cannot go into a new investigation with even a hint, and you are the only one that know, that I feel compelled to prove to people this is an anomalous thing. I once observed, and I'm not somebody who's had a lot of UFO sightings. I had a very profound one when I was a child. I had a single thing that was, I think it was anomalous because it would look like a weather satellite on a camping trip many years ago we were watching when it did that, and just made a very intense turn and continued on its trajectory. But I remember once observing with some friends in a really rural area a light in the night sky that didn't look like a plane, and it didn't make any noise, and I didn't see blinkers, and it was coming at us in a way that, you got no sense of it operating in a normal way. It was just this light that kept coming, and at a certain point it got close enough that we could begin to hear an engine, and it did make a turn, and at that point we could see one blinking light. But if I had watched that for a few minutes, knowing what I know, UFOs are real, some of them are anomalous, and left before it revealed itself, then I would be talking about, oh, that amazing UFO that I saw on that camping trip. This is such... It's like working with quicksilver or mercury sometimes. It just goes right through your fingers. You go to grab what is passing for evidence for one person, and it is not for another one. A channeled message from a disembodied spirit of somebody whose past life was on Neptune or something 487,000 years ago. Even if it is completely sincere, even if the person themselves is without guile, they're not a liar, for some of us, that's not going to constitute evidence. It's an interesting anecdote, and if it dovetailed later with physical proof and an eyewitness testimony and a laboratory result and a photo taken that location earlier then I would factor it in. For somebody else, they could care less about the kind of evidence that I offer. And occasionally, if I do a conference where they're much more interested in New Age stuff and angels and reincarnation, fascinating subjects, me talking about the soil analysis, which I think is terribly exciting, is like, oh, whatever, let us know when you're done talking about that. The next speaker has been to Venus. This is the person we want to hear. How will disclosure come? Rich, one of the things he said I thought it was terrific was, the United States government will never willingly do this, but somehow it is inevitable. One of the ways that the Vietnam War came to a head in America was a psychologist named Daniel Ellsberg leaked papers to the New York Times that he had no business doing. He broke the law, but he became the whistleblower, and for many of us he was heroic, and these papers were damning. And that's when not just kids like me protesting against the war, but our parents started to join us, and the president realized it was hopeless.
I have the feeling that it has to be a really massive craft hanging over a major city.
Well, now you bring up something really interesting, which is what I would call the V scenario.
Exactly. Yeah.
This, which was originally a 1980s made-for-television.
I remember that.
And then remade a few years ago with hipper, cooler aliens and more special effects. For me, it was not a successful project in that very quickly in the first one, which is the one I saw, it became a World War II resistance movie in every way except substitute aliens for Nazis. Very bad aliens. But the beginning, I think, is one of the most elegant, exciting, original, completely wonderful premises of any science fiction story ever. And I put it up there with H.G. Wells and Jules Verne and Robert Heinlein and other great American and European science fiction writers. Everybody in the world wakes up in the morning, and over the 60 biggest cities in the world, there's a giant mile-across mothership hanging there. Game over. Disclosure is here. It just happened. Now it's just a matter of where do we go from here. Whether it will happen so dramatically, if they're interested in revealing themselves to us, that would be a way to do it and shut up the dialogue real quick. They don't seem to be interested.
But would it be a responsible thing to do for them to do it? I mean, some say that if they're here, why don't they just show up?
The classic question.
And my response to that would be, would it be a responsible thing to do?
No. Right here is a place where I'm not a big science fiction fan. I love some science fiction, we all do. It's never been something that I've been preoccupied with. But as a member of the generation that the original Star Trek came out of, I've never followed the other ones, but I think they're great fun. And they are very much about the 60s and idealism. However, the creator of Star Trek was a man named Gene Roddenberry. And he, at times, was not just a great science fiction creator, he was a visionary. With his imagination, he could project things. And here's the premise. Regular watchers of Star Trek know the prime directive. This is what the Federation has charged you with when you go out into the universe and you're exploring a new solar system and you land on that planet, and here come these early human beings or these octopus people or whatever, and you're interacting with them. Never, ever if you are more advanced than they are, never ever reveal the degree of your advancement, because their culture, their society, their mindset can't take it. This is an example drawn from classical anthropology studies. When British soldiers marched into Africa in the 1870s, insane in their bright red woolen tunics and their gold buttons and their big hats with their muskets, when they were first perceived by the indigenous people, they were perceived as gods or devils or ghosts. And we've seen collapse after collapse of culture that would happen here. So maybe that's one reason why they don't reveal to us. But it may come in other ways. There are photos, legitimate photos taken on many missions of the surface of Mars and the surface of our moon. If they're good resolution photos and you study them with a powerful loupe, as we all know, you will see things on the surface of these foreign bodies that, I'm sorry, could not be accidents of nature. We have all seen, the profile of a woman in a tree branch, or what looks like the body of a person, in a beautiful tree, or the shape of a lamb in a cloud, or the portrait of Jesus in a tortilla, or. These are wonderful accidents of nature, but there are things on the surface of these and maybe other bodies that are manufactured. There's no question. Now, if the popular media, imagine some of these photographs showing up on, the most popular magazine and the best-selling newspaper in Copenhagen, the New York Times and CNBC and Fox News, going across the politics, start saying, what the hell? These photos have been in NASA's archives for decades, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a source that has got them for us. We've studied these things. We're talking to architects, engineers, miners, and something comes from that. Who knows? The event that I'm going to be at next week, that we're all very interested in, the big hearings on UFO secrecy, citizens' hearings that are going to take place at the National Press Club, chaired symbolically so to speak, by former members of the American Congress people. It will have the feeling of a congressional investigation, mock, at the National Press Club, wonderful location. We're going to hear compelling presentations from witnesses, from retired military personnel or former military personnel who had access to documents or first-hand accounts, or a retired military pilot. It's going to go on for 5 days. Do you really think that even though a tremendous amount of money is going into this, a great deal of publicity, that this is going to change anything? Or that the New York Times will finally say, my gosh, we got to start taking this seriously? It's going to be carried as a novelty event, if at all, by most of the media. There'll always be a couple of good reporters that will go back to their editors and say, this is serious, this is real, this is fascinating. And the guy will either say, okay, write a little piece like that, or we didn't send you there for anything but to have a nice piece for the weekend paper here, and you took it seriously. How come? So we're not in a great place yet for disclosure to come, for the people in all 4 of our lives who, when they speak to other friends, say, oh, Dieter, or Frederik, or Ryan, or especially Peter, that's my UFO friend. They really take it seriously. And, sometimes it kind of makes sense. But, oh, they're such open-minded people. I don't know. It makes me a little nervous. Or, I wonder sometimes. But they really are into it. One of the values that we, or people like us in the future, if this doesn't come in our lifetime, are going to have, besides the fact that they're more knowledgeable, is when the shit hits the fan. And all of a sudden, this is getting to be common knowledge, and people are struggling. They're struggling. And in some cultures more than others. In some families more than others. We are going to be the friend that they call. And they're saying on the phone, I even used to laugh at you a little behind your back. I love you, but I can't believe what I'm having to tell my kids now and things. will you help us out? Can you loan us some books? Do you have some things we can watch? Will you come and have dinner with us and just answer some of our questions? This is one of the real values of the disclosure movement. It's one of the real values of occasionally having somebody who's still in their 20s start to come into this work. That's been something we've talked about. We are not seeing a generation of people following our generations to do this work. Why? Too many distractions, too many things to put your attention on. I want a good job. I want an iPhone 4 instead of a 3. I'm busy on Twitter and Facebook and, with my downloads and managing my social life. And these are amazing things for us to have, but they're rewiring our brains, especially of younger people who, my niece and nephew are a perfect example. They're probably the closest thing I will ever have to children, if I don't really surprise myself and surprise somebody else even more. I love them. My nephew has just graduated from Cornell with a degree in history. My niece is a graduate student in literature going for her doctorate. They grew up with me and my sister as an aunt and uncle. I have a library of hundreds of UFO books. They've seen me on television. My niece and my sister Ann have attended lectures that I've given. But their attitude is generally, yep, UFOs are real. Some of them are anomalous. Aunt Helen was taken by them. People know who you are because you're a professional in this work. Yeah, I got it. It's absolutely true. What else is new? And why spend your life doing this rather than go on to something else? Yeah, you made your point. Very good. My niece would love me to go back to painting. I may well. I never put down my camera. I'm still a passionate photographer. But should I be doing this until I die? Am I, giving value beyond the value I've given? I don't know. But that is also a problem. And it's the first time we've ever dealt with this problem. 20-somethings, especially those coming into their 20s, they grew up with computers. They're always on a certain amount of technological overload. So that concerns me as well. If there is some major event or events...
Something you want to add to this?
Well, I will...
I don't want him to talk.
Being a 20-something. The only thing I would add to what Peter is saying is... what he's saying is very important. I came on the tail end of the whole social networking and the internet being such a mainstream thing in every home, on every phone, on all of that. There's pros and cons to all of it, but what I think Peter made a good point on is that children of today take advantage of the fact of how profound life elsewhere could be. They sort of just accept it, being so distracted by so many other things here on Earth. Getting a job. I mean, you look at the rate of jobs coming out of college here in America, and it's disheartening to say the least. It's pointless to even go to college anymore, knowing you're not going to get a job with all the money you spent on your education. Of course they're not going to be looking up in the skies. They're going to be looking on their phones for the next classified section in the newspaper for a job. They're too busy looking at what this celebrity is doing and who they're sleeping with and who got drunk, and bringing it even more current, the terrorist, if not the bombing in Boston. There's so much here on Earth that we need to deal with first before we can ever accept something coming down and interacting with us as a whole. And I think it's a good point that it's going to happen when they're ready. That's not to say that we can't move forward with the disclosure movement. I have a deep respect for those involved with the exopolitic movement, in the sense that it's smart. it's a subtle way of getting to the masses. These slow, partial disclosures, if you will, of getting one person interested, getting that serious article written by a journalist who attends the citizen hearing. We're seeing the media taking it more seriously. It's small, and it's sort of tucked in the back corner, but I do believe that the mass media is starting to take the UFO phenomenon more seriously, because there is something there. And the only thing I would add is, with the younger generation of people interested in the topic, they have these social networking tools to connect with Peter. I connected with Peter over Facebook. I connected with Larry Warren over Facebook, Stan Friedman, Richard Dolan, even you reached out to me that way. It's the generation we live in, and I think with the younger generation, we are more open to these possibilities, and we have more of that sense of, if the government's not going to tell us, we need to do it for them. I think, just as you mentioned with the Vietnam War, we have sort of this mindset as 20-somethings that we have something to say for our generation. And if the outlet is going to be through the exopolitical movement, if it's going to be through academics, through the history of UFO research, it's all of these sort of aspects coming together with a youthful and reinvigorating way of moving the field forward and saying, we are ready to hear what you know. Tell us, we'll accept it. So yeah, that would be the only, not so much as a defense for 20-somethings. I'm again on the tail end of that, almost reaching 30.
Yeah, makes sense.
It's, and what I think is important is perhaps not so much the age gap between someone like Peter and I, but how much we do connect, be it decades apart when we were born, that this is a phenomenon that we take seriously, and the youth of today do take seriously. They're just bombarded with so much more. So that would be the only thing I have to add on that.
Exopolitical groups are forming kind of naturally and organically, whether it's in Brazil or Norway or Israel or India or wherever it is. And so it is bringing us together more as people. And, one of the subjects of so many science fiction movies has been, if the Earth was invaded, wouldn't we all come together? There's a very popular idea of Ronald Reagan's, who I think knew about how real this was, and more than any other American president kept putting it on the record. I think it was his way of thinking toward his immortality, that there will be records of me speaking allegorically, but people will know. But yeah, I often, paraphrasing Reagan, I often wonder, what if we learned that there were aliens, coming toward Earth? Wouldn't we then all join together? Wouldn't we then see ourselves as people before we see ourselves as Americans or Germans or whatever? And wouldn't that be a wonderful thing? Well, yeah. And it doesn't have to be come together because there are aliens here and they might be scary, but because we're not alone in the universe and we have other living intelligent things that we should be relating to and coming forward to more in an organized way. And I'm just going to shut up now, because we can keep going on with this forever, can't we?
Thank you so much for having this talk with me.
You're very welcome.
It was a pleasure having you here.
A pleasure for us.
Yes.
Here's another great looking late 1880s, maybe to mid 1890s building that for the past 10 years or so has been the local home of our Barnes & Noble. But this building is probably landmarked, meaning that the facade is of enough historic significance that if you buy the building, part of the agreement is you can do what you want inside, but you must maintain this look.
Okay.
You can't cement it over something, which is a wonderful law. Without it, we'd be losing more and more of these wonderful old buildings, which are so much of the character of the city. This is, even as a kid, that tower up there, I mean, it was almost like that's where they keep the princess, you know. And that probably dates from the 1880s or so. Just great follies, you know, riffs.